Okay, let's start off with a summary of where we are with COVID-19. As you know, we continue to make really good progress in the city of Plattsburgh. Really only half a dozen new cases since May 15 and only a couple new cases since I think May 22nd, so that's really reassuring. On just about every single standard that we benchmark is best in the state, from antibody testing to excess hospital capacity, excess ICU capacity. Our testing, we're testing on average between 2 and 3 times more than we're required to test every day, and that's consistently good. You can see the graph that I have on my COVID-19 website, so that's a really good. Obviously, we are gearing up for the phase 3 opening on probably what will be a week from tomorrow, on next Friday. And we're expecting to open up our outdoor seating at restaurants at that time. Obviously, that came a little bit quicker than anybody thought. So we scrambled and had our DPW crews reorganize their schedule today. We worked on that all last night, and the barriers for the most part are all out for our restaurateurs. Obviously, they're very anxious to try to create a little bit of a livelihood for themselves. So we've tried to work with them as best we possibly can as well. So that's really good news, and we'll be ready for the other phase 3. Of course, it'd always be nice to have a little bit of notice before these things occur, but we scramble and do the best we can to try to take care of our local businesses nonetheless. So everything on COVID is coming along well. Of course, we always worry about monitoring the numbers and any setbacks. Clinton County Health Department has issued their requirements for any public gatherings. As you know, the governor has said that kind of low impact outdoor activities he encourages, as long as people do their social distancing. Certainly no contact sports yet at this point, or close contact kinds of things. The Clinton County Health Department states that for protesting and demonstrations, people need to wear masks. That's the protocol, but they feel that it can be done safely. People will just wear their masks. So that's our position from a public health perspective. From a public safety perspective, you know there's going to be an event planned at City Hall steps on Saturday starting at 11 o'clock. We've been working all week with the organizers. I've been out visiting with them each day. Our police have met with them. Our primary concern is, of course, public safety, and we'll be working on public safety that day. I don't think there's anybody that disagrees with their anger and frustration over some of the things we've been seeing nationally in the last few weeks, but also if you think about really the last few years. And we obviously as a nation need reform. We've reviewed our use of violence policy, or use of force policy for the city of Plattsburgh, and we're going to look at that still farther, but it does bar routine uses of chokeholds and that sort of thing that we saw so tragically with the tragic loss of life, the murder of Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis. But we will be continuing to monitor that. We're also ensuring that we view our police as guardians rather than that warrior kind of model, and they understand that duty. We're going to incorporate that even more so into their training. As you know, we run the academy for the entire region, so we're putting more of an emphasis on de-escalation rather than on use of force. And we're also doing recurring training with all our police officers as well, starting immediately, just to make sure that that lesson is never lost over time. Because I think all of us will agree that what we're seeing elsewhere in the country, to especially young African American men, is just absolutely tragic and shameful and absolutely shocking. Tonight at Common Council, I'm going to read a proclamation out. It's going to mention that we all share the anguish and don't want to compound any anguish with even further anguish locally. We all need to feel safe, and we all recognize that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. We all recognize and embrace the First Amendment that allows people to be able to collect peaceably to air their concerns. And I'd rather prefer our nation was more about we the people rather than us versus them that has been occurring over the last few years. But I certainly understand the anger and the heartbreak, and nobody in our city should ever feel like they're not accorded the same sort of rights as anybody else, regardless of race, income, status. very early on when I became mayor, I looked at the code of conduct for the police, and we did expand that. We wanted to make sure that race and gender preference and even then refugee status were all included in our code of conduct as not a basis for any sort of discrimination. So I think we've got a pretty progressive code of conduct for our police, but we should look at that again as well. My proclamation is going to read, whereas all people are created equal, and whereas this original American dream has yet to treat everybody equally 2 centuries after this bold concept of democracy, and whereas so many of our institutions are designed to preserve existing power and hence holds back so many with so much to offer, and whereas the United States Constitution incorporated its First Amendment to ensure people are free to speak peaceably, speak truth to power, whereas the injustices perpetrated against those with the least power, especially our African American and other oppressed minorities, has resulted in pain, violence, and in death. Whereas we must find a new path that protects all Americans, not just the chosen few. And whereas we all have to endure some discomfort that cannot possibly be proportional to the pain experienced by African Americans and others as inflicted by those who take an oath to guard and protect us, not wage war against us individually or collectively. Therefore, be it resolved, the city of Plattsburgh stands by the disadvantaged, the weak, the oppressed, the victims of violence, and those who view all people as created equal. And be it further resolved, the reforms of our social institutions, our policing, and our civic discourse must begin immediately so that the memory of this most tragic murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis will never be forsaken. And be it further resolved that we all condemn violence and destruction and ask that the palpable anger and energy we all feel be turned towards reform rather than retribution. Finally, I further declare this to be George Floyd Week and ask that we all gather to remember his life, the injustice of his tragic death, and our mutual commitment to peace, equal rights, and the preservation of Black lives and of the oppressed everywhere. And I'm sure my council colleagues will add some to that from their perspective as well. You know we're working on our 5 and 10 year plan. Councillor Kelly, Mayor Pro Tem Kelly, and his colleague Councillor Moore of the Finance Committee will be presenting that tonight at the Common Council meeting. That will be the basis for my mayor's budget. If they give me the numbers tonight, which I presume they will, I will be crafting my mayor's budget over the next week. Obviously, I've been working for months and months on it already, but we try to wait till about the middle of the year so we have a good sense of what was going to happen subsequently in the year. Who would have known that we had this COVID-19 surprise that completely upended everything in our budget? But they've done an incredible job first of all, a few months ago, making some very hard decisions at that time, but now writing a 5 and 10 year plan that incorporates those hard decisions into a new normal that arrived a lot quicker than probably anybody would have liked. But it also meant that they were able to come up with a budget or a 5 and 10 year plan that gets to the right sizing that we've been aiming for in a trajectory over 5 years, probably forced to do it much more quickly than anybody could have anticipated. So it's a very difficult exercise, but the good news is it's going to make it a lot easier in 2 or 3 years' time to continue on with the work because of this. We're still hopeful that we'll someday hear about a stimulus package to help bail out the city, which probably has combined losses to the tune of probably around $5 million or so at this point, anticipate between 2020 and 2021. And if that's the case, we will be able to revise our budget to incorporate a fund balance, which is now essentially by next year been completely exhausted. And as you know, I came into office in early 2017 with an essentially exhausted fund balance. We built it up to the appropriate level, and it's now back to zero again, but we'll rebuild it one more time. We feel we know how to do that. It's going to be difficult, but I think we have the tools to do it, as difficult as it is. And so you can expect that next press conference we have next week, I can roll that out. Probably 2 budgets, one based on what we know now, and another based on what we can then be permitted to do to replenish our fund balance should funding be resumed or come from the stimulus package. So with that, I think that some of you may have been at a press conference. As I mentioned last week, the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition has exercised what they said they were going to do all along and is suing the The city of Plattsburgh, presumably also the state, and Prime, and anybody else that may have been involved in the Prime project on Durkee Street. Of course, we're disappointed that the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition and the other plaintiffs would use the court system in this manner in an attempt to frustrate the state-sponsored DRI. As you know, it's been a very long process dating right back to 2015, when the idea was pitched by the then Mayor Calnon to the state of New York for a proposal for primarily Durkee Street, with some other add-ons that emerged after that. And I wish and lament that as mayor, I wish a little bit more of the preparation had been done to figure out what we're going to do with parking. Obviously, the city has, at great expense, had to create alternative parking solutions to accommodate that plan that was developed back in 2015. And those costs are still on our books, and we're really hoping that this process will come to conclusion so we can get those costs off our books and reimbursed as promised, but it's going to be very difficult to be reimbursed by the state if this project doesn't come to fruition. So I think the taxpayers need to be prepared about that eventual possibility. We typically don't, and as you know, at the time, we had a lake or a local development committee, a local planning committee that determined what would be done in the various sites. They negotiated that with the state of Plattsburgh, or state of New York. It didn't involve my office. This is a public process. Since then, we've had over 100 meetings on the public process to make sure that every single facet of this was fully considered, and the various independent boards are now, as you know, this month completing their deliberations. So I have faith in the process, I have faith in the review boards, I have faith in the local planning committee that did their work back in 2016 before I was mayor. I have faith in a good public process, and that the outcome will be probably not perfect to anybody, but hopefully good for everybody. As you well know, if you've been following the public process, the city has retained the access to the waterfront all along the Saranac River Trail right through the Durkee Street lot. And that is the basis for their lawsuit, claiming that the city hasn't retained that interest, but we do have that interest that's going to maintain in the public trust. And that is signed and is part of the development agreement between Prime Plattsburgh and between the state of New York. And we'll be able to use that waterfront in much better ways than we are now. As you know, you can't get to the waterfront currently, so it will be a nice extension of the Saranac River Trail along that area. So we actually believe that we're going to have an enhanced waterfront facility down there instead of simply a parking lot. So that's good. And I also note that although I've only met the principals of Prime one or two occasions when they've come up here for some of their public sessions, I have viewed some of the planning board materials of late, just like you from afar from attending a Zoom meeting, and I'm incredibly pleased at all the various accommodations that this company has made to widen sidewalks, to lower heights, to reduce footprints, to have further setbacks, to increase green space, to have public parking, everything that all the various groups have been asking them to do all along. So ultimately, the city doesn't see any merit in what we consider to be relatively obstructive litigation, and actually not only that, we see the city as perhaps at a very large liability financially for all the things that was expected of us to put in place up front to allow this contract between Prime and the state of Plattsburgh, or state of New York, pardon me, to proceed. But so obviously we'll do our best to defend the interests of the taxpayers to make sure they aren't holding the bag for these lawsuits that seem to be designed to preserve some preferential parking for a few businesses that have joined that parking lot, existing parking lot. We also are completing our arrangements for all the various other parking we're going to be providing. You'll see those plans rolled out. You've seen them all in concept already, but you'll see actual contracts signed probably in the next couple of weeks to create hundreds more spots in the city of Plattsburgh. You know where they already are. You've seen the demolition of one building already for one of the most important lots. So watch for that in the next couple of weeks. We'll have an announcement probably in 2 weeks' time on that as well. So I think that's all I have to offer today. Is there any questions you have? And I can turn it over to my colleagues on finance. They may have some words for some of the things that they'll be doing tonight.
Can you speak a little bit more about the restaurants reopening outdoor dining and how that's going to help City?
It's wonderful for them. It's, I saw a friend of mine wrote something to a bunch of people who reached out to see how she was doing. And she thanked them for all the help and concern. She said, I'm really not well yet, but I will be. And I think that's kind of the summary for our downtown businesses. They're not well yet. Just because they can reopen a little bit, it's probably not going to do it for them, but at least it's a help, and at least they can start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The requirements are that the tables will have to be 6 feet apart. Now you've seen how those tables try to fit into the parklets. They're relatively crammed in there because the parklets are only so big, and people want to sit outside. Well, now they have to sit outside because they can't sit inside. So the restaurateurs need more space. I know one proposal I put out there was, as you know, the council had already heavily discounted their parking permits. They don't have a parker permit, so they don't have such a financial burden to get the parking anymore. Maybe we could create more parking parklets for them. There isn't going to be as much parking downtown this summer if we can't seat as many people because of the new social distancing rules. So I think we can sacrifice a few more parking spots to create more space so they can start spreading out as the laws require. They didn't invent the laws. All they're trying to do is their very best to accommodate them. So it's incredibly tough for them, especially since many of them have been closed for a few months. Some of them haven't been doing takeout. Just hasn't been enough to cover their opening costs and their staffing costs. So they're in a terrible predicament, and we're doing our best to try to accommodate them, but also accommodate all the other competing businesses and all the other people who want to use the roads, et cetera. It's going to be very hard to find that balance, but our heart goes out for them. They're in a terrible bind.
Mayor, the lawsuit that was filed by the Citizens Coalition today is not the only lawsuit that the city is involved with. The Falcon Seaboard one comes immediately to mind. What's the fiscal impact of these lawsuits on the city, and can the city afford it?
Well, first of all, obviously we would wish we would not have to engage in a lawsuit with the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition when it's not really the city's issue. That's, this is a DRI, a state mandated DRI, and the city's merely asked to facilitate contracts between the state and a contractor, but nonetheless, we'll do what we can to defend them. With the Falcon Seaboard, as you know, back in 2010, the city lost its share of revenue sharing between the city and the town for essentially royalties on Falcon Seaboard. The city lost at that time somewhere around $800,000 a year. Now, if you look at some of the financial peril we're in right now, those are the numbers that we're in, sort of having to come up with another $800,000 or $900,000 you'll see today to make our books balance next year. So these are huge sums of money. We know from Discovery exactly what happened in 2010, and it's shameful. It's too bad that this would have occurred. We're sister towns and cities. I wasn't here at the time, but obviously the city's been paying a terrible price. If you try and track when the city's financial struggles and woes began, it was then. So I'm glad that we now know what happened. I've been trying to reach out and asking if we can just try and settle this thing. There's all kinds of avenues we can work with in settling these issues with the town, and I've raised them with the town on many, many occasions and been rebuffed at each point, but I'm not going to stop trying. The city of Plattsburgh is the single biggest taxpayer in the town with regard to land mass. We own more land in the town than any other taxpayer. And we've asked if we could be in that same category to reduce our taxes that we pay. It's a huge burden, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year we pay. Reduce our tax burden just like a county or a state government or a school district or a church is given that privilege. And of course, we use that land for things to provide water to our residents, but also to provide water to the town, to provide water to put out fires, or the water that was used to quench the Comfort Inn fire in the town of Plattsburgh a few years ago was city water, something we never billed the town for. So this is kind of a public good out there, and we've asked if only we could settle, if we could figure out a way that we'll forget about some of the things, the antics that happened back in 2010, well before I was in office, or well before Mr. Cashman was in office, in exchange for some sort of treatment similar to other governments in the town of Plattsburgh for some of these properties we use to bring water and electricity to our residents, but also to the region. I've also proposed, could we share our water? Tell me, what price would you like to pay for our water? We'll sell it to you, whatever price you feel is fair, because we have 3 times more water up in that area than we really need. So is there some arrangement we can make so you don't have to be building water towers and pumping stations and wells and all this kind of stuff? Let's cooperate. As a matter of fact, the city of Plattsburgh can provide all the water for the town of Plattsburgh, Peru, and Beekmantown, and still have enough purified, very high quality water. So there's definitely ways we can work together. I keep putting these ideas out there. I keep asking for meetings. I keep asking to settle this. I think we've got enough avenues to come up with some sort of package that ends up working best for everybody. I remain permanently hopeful for that.
In the meantime, though, you still have to have the line item on the budget to pay for these lawsuits.
Sure, which are
So
those.
how's it affecting the budget, especially when we're in the pandemic and everything's in a big crunch? I mean, what are the numbers here? How's it affecting the city budget?
Compared to the losses of just 1 year back in 2010, insignificant amount. The stakes are tens, hundreds of times higher than the actual legal fees. And the ability to have tools, the amount of taxes we pay that we could use as part of some sort of a settlement are also much larger than the legal fees. So, and I keep suggesting, and the Judge Ellis keeps suggesting, can't you sit down and work something out? The city's position is absolutely, we could do this in an afternoon. I think you've all heard me say that before. I really, truly believe we can sort all this out. Just the way the process works, I guess. When we tried to settle it at first, we were rebuffed. We were told, we're not going to have any discussions. You can see us in court if you want to discuss it. And I just hope that that attitude will change.
My question goes back to the outdoor seating. You had mentioned kind of thinking about adding more spaces for these restaurants. Is it just gonna be having them getting more of the parklets, or are you considering the road shutdowns like Carol McLean had proposed, we spoke about last week?
I have no idea. Ultimately, that's a council decision. I proposed something that was pretty quick and expeditious in just simply giving them a larger strip of their existing parklets, extend the parklets in both directions. But ultimately, it isn't my decision. It's going to be decided upon by the council.
So you proposed for them to have more things, but it hasn't been decided on yet?
Yeah, I can't decide anything. All I can do is propose to both sides that they may want to consider that as one solution.
I'm sorry, I haven't checked the agenda. Is that discussion on the agenda for tonight, or will we?
I think they will be discussing it tonight. I don't know if it's on the agenda, but I think it was brought up last week. I brought it up 2 weeks ago. I brought it up again last week, and I believe they said they'd be willing to discuss it tonight.
Mayor, in regards to the protests elsewhere around the country, we've seen citizens and police continue to clash, violence, etc. Is that a concern at all here in Plattsburgh as, events fold out?
No, we've been working very closely with the various groups all week. I'm going to be out there at the steps of City Hall tomorrow, so will my police chief, and we'll be walking with them. We believe, our interests are aligned. We're all aghast at what we've seen elsewhere. We certainly don't want ever to see that kind of thing ever happen here. And we know that every community across the country has some work to do. We're willing to do it. We're not going to fight it. We're not going to challenge it. We're not going to resort to that kind of war on crime kind of thing. We don't view policing as war. We view policing as guardianship, a very different model. And so we're out there arm in arm with the people that are concerned about the indiscriminate use of force, disproportionate use of force, and that's not something that are consistent with our values here.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mike Kelly. If you can come over here.
Sure.
Mike, it's about this afternoon's event on City Hall Place. After the event, some of the folks that were involved in that came up to me
Mm-hmm.
and said that as you were leaving,
Mm-hmm.
now, I didn't hear this, so I'm wondering if you can
Mhm.
verify or clarify that the folks that were there are claiming you made a remark, and what they claim you said is that you guys are all a bunch of idiots.
Mm-hmm.
I'm quoting them.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say that, and if so, why?
I'm going to approach those individuals one by one and speak to them, so if they want to say anything to you, they can, okay?
Okay. Did you actually say that?
As I said, I'm going to work that out with those individuals.
Okay,
Okay?
okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask for clarification.
Sure.
So I believe, you had mentioned last, I think it was at the last press conference, the lawsuits was kind of an introduction to that. But I believe you had said that the citizens were suing you personally, or they were taking legal action against you personally. And then today, during the press conference, it seemed, the way they were discussing it, that the action was being taken against the city. So, I was just hoping for some clarification on that, sort of, is it
Yeah, no, it's not me as an individual person. They
Okay.
named me because I'm the mayor of Plattsburgh.
Gotcha.
So it's the PCC against Colin Reed, mayor of the city of Plattsburgh. It's
Okay.
not against the city of Plattsburgh.
Okay, thank you.
Because a corporation has no face, you have to put a face to it. Any further questions? Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'll be seeing you on Saturday.
Henry, do you happen to know the time on
I
Saturday? I've heard
don't
like.
mean any disrespect.
I think
I
it's a
just,
low-
they came up to me and I'm like,
Show you the thing.
why would they tell me this?